The December rain drummed against the windshield of Marcus Thompson's 2015 Toyota Camry like a melancholy symphony, each drop carrying the weight of another difficult day in Nashville. At 52, Marcus had weathered many storms, but none quite like the one that had swept away everything he once called his own. The yellow taxi light on his roof cast a dim glow through the evening mist, a beacon of hope in a city that seemed to have forgotten his name. "Dispatch to car 47, you got a pickup at the Hermitage Hotel," crackled the radio, interrupting Marcus's thoughts as he sat parked outside a downtown diner, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since grown cold. "Car 47 responding," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the exhaustion that had settled deep into his bones. He'd been driving for 14 hours straight, taking every call that came his way. When you're living in your car, every fare matters, every dollar counts toward the next meal, the next tank of gas, the next day of survival. The Hermitage Hotel stood like a grand dame of the South, its classic elegance a stark contrast to Marcus's current reality. He remembered bringing Sarah here for their 20th wedding anniversary, back when life held promises instead of just memories. She'd worn that blue dress he loved, the one that brought out her eyes, and they danced in the lobby to the soft jazz music that drifted from the bar. Marcus adjusted his rearview mirror and straightened his tie. The same navy blue tie Sarah had given him for Christmas 5 years ago. No matter how far he'd fallen, he refused to let his appearance reflect his circumstances. "Dignity," Sarah used to say, "comes from within, but it shows on the outside." Even now, 6 months after losing her to cancer, her voice remained his compass. A doorman approached the taxi, his crisp uniform a reminder of the world Marcus once knew as a guest, rather than hired help. "Your passenger will be right out, sir," the young man said, his tone respectful despite Marcus's humble station. Through the hotel's gleaming glass doors, Marcus watched as an older woman emerged, her presence commanding attention without seeming to demand it. She wore a simple but elegant coat, her silver hair styled in a way that suggested both practicality and grace. Something about her seemed familiar, but in the dim light and his exhausted state, Marcus couldn't quite place her. "Evening, ma'am," Marcus said, stepping out to open her door. "Where can I take you tonight?" "Well, aren't you a gentleman?" she replied, her voice carrying the warm cadence of East Tennessee mountains mixed with something more refined. "I need to get to Belle Meade, Sugar, 4247 Harding Pike." Marcus knew the address. Belle Meade was old Nashville money, where mansions sat on manicured lawns, and success wasn't just achieved, it was inherited. As he settled behind the wheel, he caught his passenger's eyes in the rearview mirror. They held kindness, the kind that comes from understanding life's complexities rather than avoiding them. "Been driving long?" she asked as they pulled into Nashville's evening traffic. The city sparkled around them, its neon signs and bustling nightlife painting pictures of dreams and ambitions that seemed as distant as stars to Marcus. "About 3 years as a cabbie," Marcus replied, navigating through the familiar streets. "Used to manage a construction company, but, well, life has a way of changing plans." The woman leaned forward slightly, genuinely interested. In his experience, most passengers either ignored their driver completely or made small talk out of politeness. This felt different, authentic curiosity about a fellow human being. "Construction, now that's honest work," she said. "What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" Marcus hesitated. In the past months, he'd perfected the art of deflecting such questions, offering vague responses that satisfied curiosity without revealing vulnerability. But something about this passenger, perhaps it was her genuine tone, or maybe it was the exhaustion finally breaking down his carefully maintained walls, made him want to answer honestly. "My wife got sick," he began, his hands tightening slightly on the steering wheel. "Sarah, ovarian cancer. The treatments, the medications that insurance wouldn't cover, the experimental therapies we tried when conventional medicine wasn't enough. We spent everything. Sold the business, mortgaged the house, cashed in retirement accounts, and in the end, his voice trailed off as they stopped at a red light. "I'm so sorry for your loss," the woman said softly, and Marcus could hear genuine sympathy in her voice, not the hollow condolences he'd grown accustomed to hearing. "She fought for 2 years," Marcus continued, surprising himself with his openness. "Never complained, not once. Even when the bank foreclosed on our house last spring, she just smiled and said we'd figure it out, said all that mattered was that we had each other." The light turned green, and Marcus drove on, the familiar ache in his chest intensifying. "She passed in June. Peaceful, at least. I was holding her hand." "That's love," the woman said simply. "Real love, the kind that doesn't count the cost." And they drove in comfortable silence for a few moments, the city lights blurring slightly through Marcus's tired eyes. He'd shared more with this stranger in 5 minutes than he had with friends and family in months. There was something about her presence that invited honesty, that made vulnerability feel safe rather than shameful. "So now you're starting over," she observed, not as a question but as an acknowledgement of his courage. "Trying to," Marcus admitted. "It's harder than I expected. I'm 52, living in my cab most nights. The shelter downtown is full more often than not, and the waiting list for affordable housing, well, let's just say I'd better get comfortable with these vinyl seats." He caught her studying him in the mirror again, her expression thoughtful. "You know, I've lived in Nashville most of my life, and I can usually tell a lot about a person by how they drive these streets. You're patient with other drivers, you signal your turns, you haven't cursed once at that idiot who cut us off back there. Says something about character." Marcus felt a flush of warmth at the compliment. "My daddy always said you can judge a man by how he treats people who can't do anything for him. I guess driving a cab puts that philosophy to the test pretty regularly." "Smart daddy," she replied with a smile Marcus could hear in her voice. "What was his name?" "James Thompson. Worked construction his whole life, just like I did. Built half the bridges in Middle Tennessee back in the day. He used to say that every structure needs a solid foundation, whether it's made of concrete or character." As they turned onto Harding Pike, the neighborhoods grew increasingly affluent. Massive homes sat behind iron gates and perfectly maintained hedges, their windows glowing with warm light that spoke of security and stability. Marcus felt the familiar pang of remembrance. He and Sarah had driven through these neighborhoods during their Sunday afternoon drives, playing their game of what if about the lives lived behind those grand facades. "Your daddy sounds like he was a wise man," the woman said. "Did he get to meet your Sarah?" "Oh, yes." Marcus's face brightened for the first time all evening. They adored each other. Daddy used to joke that I'd married above my station, but Sarah would have none of that talk. She said love doesn't know about stations, only about hearts that recognize each other. She sounds like she was something special. "She was everything," Marcus replied simply. "Kindergarten teacher for 30 years. Loved those kids like they were her own. When she got sick, former students and parents started showing up at the hospital. Some of them were adults now, with children of their own, telling Sarah how she'd changed their lives, how she'd believed in them when no one else did. They were nearing their destination now, the address numbers climbing steadily. Marcus found himself not wanting the conversation to end. It had been months since he'd talked about Sarah with someone who seemed genuinely interested in hearing about the woman who'd been his world. "What was her favorite thing about teaching?" the woman asked. Marcus smiled, remembering. She said every child was like a seed, full of potential just waiting for the right conditions to grow. She kept a photo album of Christmas cards and graduation announcements from students over the years. Must have been thousands of them. When we had to move out of the house, that album was one of the few things she insisted on keeping. "Do you still have it?" "It's in a storage unit across town, along with a few other things we couldn't bear to sell." Marcus's voice grew quiet. "I pay $50 a month for that 10 by 10 space. Some people might think it's foolish, spending money I don't have to keep things I can't use, but But they're not just things, the woman finished gently. They're pieces of your heart. Exactly, Marcus said, grateful for her understanding. There's Sarah's wedding dress, some of her students' artwork, photo albums from our travels, things that don't have monetary value but are priceless to me. Indeed, as they pulled into the long driveway of 4247 Harding Pike, Marcus was struck by the understated elegance of the property. Unlike some of the ostentatious mansions they'd passed, this home seemed to prioritize comfort over show, with warm light spilling from windows that suggested a place where people actually lived and laughed rather than just displayed their success. "Well, here we are," Marcus announced, though he found himself reluctant to end their conversation. "That'll be $18.50. The woman handed him a $20 bill. "Keep the change, sugar. And Marcus?" He turned, surprised that she knew his name, though he realized it was displayed on his taxi license visible from the back seat. "Thank you for sharing your story with me. Your daddy was right about character, and your Sarah, well, she chose well." As she stepped out of the cab, Marcus felt compelled to speak. "Ma'am, I don't usually... I'm not one to burden passengers with my troubles. There's just something about you that made it feel right to share. Thank you for listening." She paused at her door, looking back with that same warm smile. Sometimes the best gift we can give someone is simply being willing to see them, really see them. You take care of yourself, Marcus Thompson, and don't give up on tomorrow. Sometimes it holds surprises we never saw coming. As Marcus drove away, watching the mansion disappear in his rear-view mirror, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months, a sense of connection, of being truly heard by another human being. The woman had asked for nothing more than safe passage home, yet she'd given him something invaluable, a reminder that compassion still existed in the world, and that his story, his struggles, his love for Sarah, all mattered to someone. He didn't know her name, might never see her again, but their brief encounter had lifted some of the weight he'd been carrying. For the first time in weeks, Marcus allowed himself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, tomorrow might indeed hold something better than today. The rain had stopped while he'd been driving, and as Marcus headed back toward downtown Nashville to look for his next fare, the clouds began to part, revealing a few determined stars pushing through the winter sky. The next morning brought the kind of crisp December day that made Nashville sparkle like a jewel against the Tennessee landscape. Marcus had spent another night in his taxi, parked behind a 24-hour diner on Dickerson Pike, where the owner, Betty Sullivan, had quietly made it known that overnight parking was acceptable for folks going through hard times. Betty never said it outright, that would have embarrassed both parties, but her small act of compassion meant Marcus had a safe place to rest without fear of being moved along by police. He'd awakened before dawn, as had become his habit, and performed his morning routine with the precision of a man determined to maintain dignity despite circumstances. A quick wash in the diner's restroom, teeth brushed, hair combed, and the same navy blue tie straightened around his neck. Looking in the mirror, Marcus saw his father's eyes staring back, tired but determined, weathered but not broken. "Morning, Marcus," Betty called from behind the counter as he entered the diner. At 68, she'd been running Sullivan's Diner for over 40 years, and she had an uncanny ability to read people's situations without making them feel judged. "Coffee's fresh." "Morning, Betty. Much obliged." Marcus slid onto his usual stool at the counter, grateful for the warmth and the illusion of normalcy that came with having a place where people knew his name. "How about some breakfast?" she asked, already pouring his coffee. "Got some day-old biscuits that need eating. Shame to waste them." Marcus appreciated Betty's tactful way of offering help. Day-old biscuits were actually fresh from the oven, but calling them that allowed him to accept her generosity without feeling like charity. "If you're sure they need eating," he replied with a smile that acknowledged their gentle conspiracy. As he ate, Marcus found his thoughts drifting to the previous evening's passenger. There had been something almost magical about their conversation, the way she'd drawn out his story with such genuine interest. Most people, when they learned about his circumstances, either offered uncomfortable platitudes or quickly changed the subject. But she had listened, really listened, as if his words mattered, as if his love for Sarah and his current struggles were worthy of attention and respect. "You seem different this morning," Betty observed, refilling his coffee cup. "Not as heavy, if you don't mind me saying." Marcus considered her words. She was right, he did feel different, though he couldn't quite articulate why. "Had an interesting passenger last night. Sometimes it helps to talk to someone who actually listens, you know." Betty nodded knowingly. "People need to be seen, Marcus. Really seen. It's one of the most basic human needs and one of the rarest gifts we can give each other." His phone buzzed with a text from dispatch. Early morning fare needed at Nashville General Hospital. Marcus finished his breakfast, left a modest tip despite his tight finances, and headed back to his cab. The hospital was a familiar destination. He'd spent countless hours there during Sarah's illness, first hopeful, then desperate, and finally accepting. The pickup was a young nurse finishing her night shift, exhaustion written in every line of her body. As they drove toward her apartment in Antioch, she mentioned how grateful she was for drivers like him who were clean, professional, and safe. "You'd be amazed how rare that is," she said. "Most of us night shift workers have stories about drivers who made us uncomfortable or cabs that weren't clean." Her words reminded Marcus why he maintained his standards despite his circumstances. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Son, the work you do is a reflection of who you are. Do it with pride, no matter what others think." The morning passed with routine fares. Business people heading to meetings, shoppers going to the mall, an elderly gentleman visiting his wife at a nursing home. Each passenger brought their own story, their own struggles and joys, and Marcus found himself listening more intently than usual, perhaps inspired by the previous evening's reminder of the power of being truly heard. It was just after lunch when his phone rang with an unusual call. Not dispatch, but a direct number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Thompson, this is Jennifer Harrison from Harrison and Associates Legal Services. I have a rather unusual request, and I was hoping you might be available for a private hire this afternoon." Marcus was intrigued. Private hires were rare and usually more lucrative than regular taxi fares. "What kind of service are you looking for, ma'am?" "I need someone to drive me to several locations around Nashville. Someone discreet, professional, and, well, I was specifically told to call you. The woman who referred you said you were exactly the kind of person I needed for this particular task." "Who referred you, if you don't mind me asking?" There was a pause. "I'm not at liberty to say right now, but she assured me you were trustworthy and had excellent character. She was quite insistent that you were the only driver who would do." Marcus felt a flutter of curiosity mixed with apprehension. "What would this involve exactly?" "I need to visit several locations, make some inquiries, handle some paperwork. It's all legitimate, I assure you, but it requires someone who can be counted on to be professional and confidential. The pay would be $200 for the afternoon, plus any expenses." $200. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. That was more than he usually made in 3 days of regular fares. "When would you need this service?" "Could you meet me at my office in an hour? I'm at 2100 West End Avenue, Suite 400. After confirming the details, Marcus hung up, feeling a mixture of excitement and bewilderment. Who could have referred him? He'd had so many passengers over the past 3 years that it could have been anyone, but something told him this was connected to the woman from the previous evening. There had been something in her demeanor, her questions, that suggested she was someone accustomed to making things happen. Harrison and Associates occupied a sleek office in one of West End's modern buildings. Jennifer Harrison turned out to be a sharp-dressed woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and the efficient manner of someone who got things done. She greeted Marcus in her office, which was decorated with family photos and legal awards. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Thompson. Before we begin, I need to explain what this is about, and I need your word that you'll keep everything confidential." "You have it," Marcus replied, his curiosity intensifying. "A client of mine has asked me to compile some information about various charitable organizations and community resources in Nashville. She's considering making some significant donations and wants to ensure her money goes to places that really make a difference. She specifically asked that we use your services for transportation because she trusts your judgment and discretion." Marcus was puzzled but agreed to help. Over the next 4 hours, they visited 12 different locations: homeless shelters, food banks, job training centers, medical clinics serving the uninsured, and programs that helped people rebuild their lives after personal tragedies. At each stop, Jennifer would meet with administrators and ask detailed questions about their services, their greatest needs, and their success stories. What struck Marcus most was how Jennifer always introduced him not as "my driver," but as "my colleague, Marcus Thompson," and often asked for his observations about the facilities and the people they met. His years of construction work had given him a good eye for building maintenance and infrastructure needs, while his recent experiences with homelessness and financial hardship provided insights into which programs might be most effective. "The shelter on Jefferson Street seems well run," Marcus observed as they drove between locations. "But their roof needs work, and the bathroom facilities are inadequate for the number of people they serve." "Good eye," Jennifer replied, making notes. "What about the job training center we visited?" "Impressive programs, but they need more funding for tools and equipment. You can't teach modern construction techniques with outdated machinery. However, the staff seems genuinely committed to helping people succeed, not just processing them through programs." As the afternoon progressed, Marcus found himself drawn into the work, energized by the opportunity to use his knowledge and experience in a meaningful way. These were organizations serving people like him, individuals who'd fallen on hard times through circumstances beyond their control, but who retained dignity and determination to rebuild their lives. At their final stop, the East Nashville Community Clinic, they met Dr. Patricia Williams, a physician who had left a lucrative private practice to serve uninsured patients. As she showed them around the facility, Marcus was struck by the dedication of the staff and the obvious need for their services. "We see about 200 patients a week," Dr. Williams explained. "Many are working people who simply can't afford health insurance. Others are folks transitioning from homelessness who need medical attention to be able to work again." Marcus thought about Sarah's cancer treatments, how even with insurance, the costs had devastated their finances. For people without coverage, a serious illness meant choosing between health and financial survival, a choice no one should have to make. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Williams walked them to their car. "You know, Mr. Thompson, you remind me of one of our regular patients. Man about your age, lost his wife to cancer, ended up homeless, but never lost his dignity or his willingness to help others. People like you are why we do this work." The comment hit Marcus deeply, reminding him that he wasn't alone in his struggles. As they drove back to Jennifer's office, he found himself thinking about all the people they'd met that day, both the helpers and the helped, and how thin the line was between stability and crisis in most people's lives. "You've been extremely helpful today," Jennifer said as they returned to her office. "My client will be very pleased with the thoroughness of our assessment." She handed him an envelope. "Your fee, plus a little extra for your insights." Marcus opened the envelope to find $300 instead of the promised $200. "Ma'am, this is too much." "It's exactly what you earned," she replied firmly. "Your observations were invaluable, and your professionalism made this day much more productive than it would have been otherwise." As Marcus drove home, though home was really just wherever he parked his cab, he reflected on the day's events. The work had felt meaningful in a way that regular taxi driving, while honest, rarely did. He'd been able to contribute something beyond transportation, to use his experience and knowledge to help evaluate resources for people in need. But questions lingered. Who was Jennifer's client? How did this mysterious woman know enough about him to specifically request his services? And why did he feel like this was all connected to his passenger from the previous evening? That night, parked behind Sullivan's diner with $300 in his pocket, more money than he'd seen at one time in months, Marcus allowed himself to feel something he'd almost forgotten. Hope, not just for tomorrow's fares or next week's rent, but for the possibility that his life still had purpose, that his experiences and struggles might actually help others. As he drifted off to sleep in the back seat of his cab, wrapped in the blanket Sarah had crocheted during her last months, Marcus whispered a prayer of gratitude for the day's work, for Jennifer's respect, for the mysterious benefactor who had somehow seen value in him when he'd almost forgotten it himself. The third day dawned with an unexpected phone call that would change everything Marcus thought he knew about his recent encounters. He was performing his morning routine at Sullivan's diner when his cell phone rang, displaying a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Thompson, this is Rebecca Chen from Music City Media Relations. I hope I'm not calling too early." Marcus glanced at the clock. 7:30 a.m. "Not at all, ma'am. How can I help you?" "I have what might sound like an unusual request. A client of mine would like to meet with you this morning. She'd prefer to do it in your taxi, if that's agreeable to you. She values privacy and feels more comfortable in an informal setting." Another mysterious client. Marcus was beginning to suspect these weren't coincidental. "What kind of meeting?" "She'd like to discuss a business proposition with you. Nothing complicated, but it could be quite beneficial to your situation." "Would you be available around 10 o'clock? I can give you an address for pickup." The address was in Green Hills, another affluent Nashville neighborhood. Marcus agreed, his curiosity now thoroughly aroused. 2 unusual requests in 2 days, both from people who seemed to know more about him than strangers should. As he drove toward the meeting, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being guided by an invisible hand towards something important. The pickup address turned out to be a small office building, nondescript but well-maintained. Rebecca Chen met him in the lobby, a petite woman in her 30s, with the efficient demeanor of someone accustomed to managing complex situations discreetly. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Thompson. My client prefers to conduct business in informal settings. She finds offices too intimidating for personal conversations." Rebecca slid into the front passenger seat. "Would you mind driving us to Centennial Park? She'll meet us there." As they drove through Nashville's morning traffic, Rebecca explained that her client was someone who preferred to remain anonymous when helping others. She believes that charity works best when it doesn't seek recognition or create obligations. She simply wants to help good people who've fallen on hard times through no fault of their own. At Centennial Park, Rebecca directed Marcus to a quiet area near the Parthenon replica that served as Nashville's iconic centerpiece. "She'll be along shortly," Rebecca said, checking her phone. "In the meantime, I'd like to ask you a few questions, if that's all right." "Go ahead." "The lady from the Hermitage Hotel. What did you think of her?" Marcus felt his suspicion confirmed. "So it was her who referred me for yesterday's job." Rebecca smiled. "She was very impressed with you, Mr. Thompson. Said you were exactly the kind of person she'd been hoping to meet. Someone with genuine character who'd maintain dignity despite difficult circumstances. I still don't understand who she was or why she's taken such an interest in my situation." "You will soon," Rebecca assured him. "But first, tell me about your conversation with her. What did you talk about?" Marcus recounted the evening's conversation, the way the mysterious woman had drawn out his story about Sarah, about losing everything to her medical bills, about his current struggles. As he spoke, he noticed Rebecca taking notes, though he sensed it wasn't for any official purpose. "She was particularly interested in your storage unit," Rebecca observed, "the one with your wife's belongings." "Yes, though I'm not sure why. It's just Memories mostly. Things that matter to me, but wouldn't mean anything to anyone else. A few minutes later, Marcus saw a familiar figure walking across the park toward their car. It was his passenger from 2 nights ago, wearing casual clothes, but carrying herself with the same quiet confidence he'd noticed before. As she approached the taxi, Marcus felt a jolt of recognition that had been nagging at him since their first meeting. She slid into the back seat with a warm smile. "Hello again, Marcus. I hope you don't mind the intrigue, but I wanted to get to know you a bit before introducing myself properly." "I feel like I should know who you are," Marcus said, studying her face in the rearview mirror. "There's something familiar." The woman laughed, a sound like music itself. "Well, sugar. That's probably because you've seen me on television or heard me on the radio more times than you can count. I'm Dolly Parton." Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. Of course. Now that she'd said it, he couldn't believe he hadn't recognized her immediately. Dolly Parton, the queen of country music, the woman whose songs had provided the soundtrack to his and Sarah's courtship and marriage, the woman who'd built an entertainment empire but never forgot her humble mountain roots. "Miss Parton, I'm sorry I didn't recognize you right away. I guess I wasn't expecting to find me riding in a taxi." Dolly laughed again. "Honey, I've been taking taxis, buses, and whatever else I needed to get around since before I was famous. Fame doesn't change who you are inside, and I've never forgotten where I came from." Marcus was speechless, trying to process this revelation. Dolly Parton had been his passenger, had listened to his story, had somehow arranged the previous day's work, and was now sitting in his back seat wanting to discuss a business proposition. "I know this is a lot to take in," Dolly continued, her voice gentle and understanding. "But after talking with you the other night, I couldn't stop thinking about your story, about you and Sarah, about how you lost everything trying to save her, about how you're living in your car but still maintaining your dignity and kindness." "Ma'am, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything just yet. Let me tell you why I'm here." Dolly leaned forward slightly, her eyes meeting his in the mirror. "I've been blessed beyond measure in my life and career, but I've learned that blessings are meant to be shared, especially with people who remind us of the best parts of humanity." Rebecca handed Marcus a folder. "Ms. Parton has a proposition for you, Mr. Thompson. But first, she wanted you to know that this isn't charity. It's recognition of your character and an investment in your future." Marcus opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were documents that made no sense at first glance. Property deeds, business licenses, insurance papers. "I don't understand." "The storage unit where you keep Sarah's belongings," Dolly explained. "I've purchased the entire facility. More than that, I'm offering you a position managing it. The pay is $60,000 a year, plus benefits, plus a small apartment on the property." Marcus stared at the papers, unable to process what he was reading. "Miss Parton, I can't. This is too much. I don't deserve—" "Stop right there," Dolly interrupted firmly. "Don't you dare say you don't deserve this. You spent everything you had trying to save the woman you loved. You're living in your car, but still treating every passenger with respect and dignity. You maintained your standards and your character when it would have been easy to let bitterness take over. If that's not deserving, I don't know what is. But why me? You don't even know me." Dolly's expression softened. "Marcus, I knew everything I needed to know about you within the first 5 minutes of our conversation. The way you talked about Sarah, about your daddy, about maintaining dignity despite your circumstances. The way you treated a stranger in your cab with respect and kindness, even though you were hurting. That tells me who you are at your core." Rebecca explained the details. The storage facility was profitable and well run, requiring a manager who was trustworthy, detail-oriented, and good with people. The apartment was modest, but comfortable, and the job would allow Marcus to be around Sarah's belongings whenever he needed that connection. "There's more," Dolly added with a smile that suggested she was enjoying this immensely. "I've also set up a small foundation, the Sarah Thompson Memorial Fund. that provides financial assistance to families dealing with catastrophic medical expenses. I'd like you to help me run it, using your experience to identify people who need help and ensuring the money goes where it's most needed." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. "Miss Parton, I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, sugar. Just pay it forward. Help other people the way I'm helping you. Keep Sarah's memory alive by making sure other families don't have to choose between love and financial survival." The conversation continued for another hour, with Rebecca explaining the practical details of the transition. Marcus could start the new job immediately, move into the apartment within the week, and begin working with the foundation once he was settled. The storage facility's previous owner had been planning to retire anyway, and was delighted to sell to someone who would maintain his high standards. "There's one last thing," Dolly said as their meeting drew to a close. "I want you to know that this isn't about pity or charity. I've been watching you for longer than you might think. Rebecca has been quietly checking on you for the past month, making sure I understood your situation correctly. This is about recognizing character and investing in someone I believe will use this opportunity to help others." As Dolly prepared to leave, she handed Marcus a small envelope. "This is from Sarah," she said simply. Marcus opened it with shaking hands to find a Christmas card he'd never seen before. Inside, in Sarah's familiar handwriting, "My dearest Marcus, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you found your way to someone special. I wrote this and gave it to my nurse with instructions to find a way to get it to you when the time was right. I know you're struggling, and I know you blame yourself for not being able to save me. But baby, you gave me everything. Your love, your devotion, your very soul. Now I need you to do one more thing for me. Let yourself be helped. Let someone else be your angel the way you were mine. You deserve happiness, you deserve peace, and you deserve a future filled with purpose. I love you always, Sarah." Marcus broke down completely, sobbing in his taxi while Dolly held his hand through the partition and Rebecca quietly provided tissues. When he finally composed himself, Dolly squeezed his shoulder. "She arranged this, you know," Dolly said softly. "Somehow, some way, Sarah made sure our paths crossed. I don't question things like that. I just accept them as gifts and try to be worthy of the trust." As Dolly walked away across Centennial Park, Marcus sat in his taxi holding Sarah's final letter, surrounded by documents that represented a completely new life. The woman whose songs had played at his wedding, whose music had comforted him and Sarah through countless difficult moments, had just handed him back his future. But more than that, she'd reminded him of something he'd almost forgotten, that love never truly dies. It just finds new ways to express itself. Sarah's love was still working in his life, still protecting him, still guiding him toward the light even from beyond. For the first time since Sarah's death, Marcus Thompson allowed himself to believe that tomorrow would be better than today, and that his story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning a new chapter, one filled with purpose, dignity, and the kind of hope that comes from knowing that even in the darkest moments, angels still walk among us, sometimes wearing rhinestones and carrying country music in their hearts. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the doorway of his new apartment, a cozy 2-bedroom space above the office of Hermitage Storage Solutions. The morning sun streamed through clean windows, illuminating rooms that felt more like home than anywhere he'd lived since losing the house he'd shared with Sarah. The transition had been smoother than he'd dared hope. Dolly had been true to her word about every detail. The apartment came furnished with comfortable, quality pieces that felt chosen with care rather than purchased in bulk. The kitchen was small but functional, stocked with basic necessities, and a coffee maker that produced the best cup he'd tasted in months. Most importantly, there was a spare bedroom where he'd carefully arranged Sarah's belongings. Her wedding dress hung in the closet, her student artwork adorned the walls, and her photo albums filled a bookshelf by the window. "Mr. Thompson," a voice called from downstairs. Marcus recognized it as belonging to Janet Rodriguez, the facility's assistant manager who'd stayed on to help him learn the business. At 55, Janet had worked at Hermitage Storage for 12 years and knew every customer, every unit, and every quirk of the operation. "Coming, Janet," Marcus called, taking one last look around his new home before heading downstairs to the office. The storage facility was larger than he'd initially realized. 200 units spread across 8 buildings on 10 acres of well-maintained property. The previous owner, Robert Mitchell, had built a reputation for security, cleanliness, and treating customers with respect, values that aligned perfectly with Marcus's own principles. "We've got the Henderson family coming in at 10, Janet informed him as he entered the office. "They're moving their elderly mother into assisted living and need a unit for her furniture. It's always hard on families when they have to make that kind of decision." Marcus nodded, remembering his own difficult decisions about which of Sarah's possessions to keep when they'd lost their house. "I'll handle it personally. Sometimes people need to talk through what they're storing and why." This had become Marcus's approach to the business, treating each customer not as a transaction, but as a person going through a significant life change. Whether they were college students storing belongings between semesters, military families facing deployment, or people downsizing due to financial difficulties, everyone who rented a unit at Hermitage Storage was navigating some form of transition. The Henderson family arrived right on time, an anxious-looking daughter in her 50s, accompanied by her teenage son. Marcus greeted them warmly and listened as Patricia Henderson explained their situation. Her 83-year-old mother had fallen twice in recent months and could no longer live independently, but giving up her belongings felt like giving up her identity. "She's been in that house for 40 years, Patricia explained, her voice thick with emotion. "Every piece of furniture has a story. Every knick-knack holds a memory. How do you pack up a lifetime and put it in a storage unit?" Marcus understood completely. "You don't pack up a lifetime, Mrs. Henderson. You preserve the most important pieces so they'll be there when you need them. Your mother isn't losing her memories. She's keeping them safe for visits whenever she wants them." He showed them several available units, explaining the security features and climate control options. As they walked through the facility, Marcus shared his own experience of storing Sarah's belongings, how having access to those memories had helped him through the grieving process. "The goal isn't to forget or move on," he told them. "It's to create a safe space where love and memories can wait for you." By the time they completed the paperwork, Patricia Henderson was in tears, but they were tears of relief rather than despair. "Thank you," she said, squeezing Marcus's hand. "You've made this so much easier. I feel like Mom's things will be in good hands." After they left, Janet shook her head in amazement. "I've been doing this for 12 years, and I've never seen anyone handle a difficult customer situation like that. You have a gift for this work." Marcus felt a warmth in his chest that he recognized as purpose. This was more than just a job. It was a way to use his own experiences to help others navigate difficult transitions. Every customer who walked through their doors was carrying some form of loss or change, and his role was to make that burden a little lighter. The afternoon brought a different kind of challenge. Rebecca Chen arrived with the first family to be helped by the Sarah Thompson Memorial Fund, the Williamson family from Murfreesboro. David Williamson was a construction worker, like Marcus had been, and his wife Linda worked part-time at a grocery store. Their 6-year-old daughter Emma had been diagnosed with leukemia, and even with insurance, the treatment costs were devastating their family finances. "We never thought we'd be asking for charity," Linda said quietly as they sat in Marcus's office. "David's worked every day since he was 16, and we've always paid our bills. But Emma's treatments, the insurance doesn't cover everything, and we can't work as much because someone needs to be with her during chemo." Marcus looked at the family's financial documentation, seeing his own story reflected in their struggle. The medical bills, the insurance denials, the choice between treatment and financial survival, it was all painfully familiar. "First, this isn't charity," Marcus said firmly. "This is a community helping its own. Sarah and I went through this same situation, and we learned that fighting cancer is hard enough without fighting the financial system at the same time. And the Sarah Thompson Memorial Fund had been designed to provide both immediate financial assistance and long-term support. For the Williamson family, this meant covering Emma's uncovered medical expenses, helping with transportation costs to the Children's Hospital in Nashville, and providing temporary financial assistance so Linda could take extended leave to be with her daughter. "The fund will cover Emma's treatment costs for the next year," Marcus explained. "But more than that, we're going to connect you with other families who've been through this journey. Sometimes the emotional support is as important as the financial help." David Williamson broke down crying, the relief of a man who'd been carrying an impossible burden finally finding help. "I don't know how to thank you. We were talking about selling our house, cashing in everything we had." "Don't thank me," Marcus replied. "Thank my wife, Sarah, and then promise me you'll help another family when you're able. That's how this works. We help each other." After the Williamsons left, Rebecca stayed to discuss the fund's operations. In just 3 weeks, they'd received over 50 applications for assistance, and Dolly had committed to funding at least 20 families in the first year. "You're handling this perfectly," Rebecca told Marcus. "Dolly knew you'd understand these families' situations in a way that someone who hadn't lived it never could." That evening, Marcus climbed the stairs to his apartment, feeling the satisfying exhaustion that comes from meaningful work. He prepared a simple dinner and sat at his small dining table, looking out at the storage facility he now managed. The buildings were quiet in the fading light, but he knew they were full of people's memories, hopes, and pieces of lives that deserved to be honored and preserved. His phone rang, a number he now recognized as Dolly's personal line. "How was your first day working with the fund?" she asked without preamble. "Difficult and wonderful at the same time," Marcus replied honestly. "The Williamson family reminded me so much of Sarah and me when we were starting her treatments. Full of hope, but terrified of what was coming." "That's exactly why you're the right person for this work," Dolly said. "You can give them something no amount of money can buy, understanding from someone who's walked that path." They talked for 20 minutes about the fund, about Marcus's adjustment to his new life, and about his plans for expanding the storage facility's services. Dolly had become more than a benefactor. She'd become a friend and mentor, someone who checked in regularly and offered guidance without being intrusive. "There's something I want to ask you," Dolly said, as their conversation wound down. "I'm planning a small concert in the spring to raise awareness for the fund. Nothing huge, just an intimate venue with people who support the cause. Would you be willing to speak about Sarah, about your experience, about why this work matters?" Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Speaking in public had never been comfortable for him, and talking about Sarah to strangers seemed impossibly difficult. But then he thought about the Williamson family, about little Emma fighting leukemia, about all the families who might be helped if more people understood the financial devastation that comes with serious illness. "Yes," he said simply. Sarah would want her story to help others. After ending the call, Marcus walked into the spare bedroom where Sarah's belongings waited. He sat in the chair beside her bookshelf and pulled out one of her photo albums. Pictures of her students over the years, Christmas cards from families, drawings and letters from children whose lives she'd touched. "Look at this, baby," he whispered, opening to a page of artwork from her final year of teaching. "We're still making a difference, just like you always did, just like you taught me to do." As he looked through the album, Marcus realized that his new life wasn't really about moving on from Sarah. It was about carrying her forward, letting her love and values continue to touch other people's lives. The storage facility preserved memories, but the Memorial Fund preserved hope. Both were ways of honoring what mattered most, the connections between people, the power of love to endure beyond death, and the responsibility to use our blessings to lift others up. Outside his window, Nashville glittered in the darkness, a city full of dreams and struggles, successes and failures. Somewhere out there were families facing the same crisis he and Sarah had faced, wondering how they'd survive the financial devastation of serious illness. But now, thanks to Dolly's generosity and Sarah's enduring love, there was help available, not just money, but understanding, support, and hope. Marcus closed the photo album and prepared for bed, feeling grateful for the journey that had brought him to this moment. 3 weeks ago, he'd been living in his taxi, struggling to maintain dignity while his world crumbled around him. Tonight, he was falling asleep in his own bed, in his own home, preparing for another day of meaningful work, helping others navigate their own difficult transitions. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was a life filled with purpose, and Sarah would have approved completely. 6 months later, Marcus stood backstage at the historic Ryman Auditorium, his hands trembling slightly as he held the speech he'd written and rewritten dozens of times. Through the curtain, he could hear the gentle murmur of the audience. 2,000 people who had paid to attend Dolly Parton's Songs of Hope benefit concert for the Sarah Thompson Memorial Fund. Nervous, sugar? Dolly appeared beside him, resplendent in a sequined dress that caught the stage lights like captured starlight. Despite her glamorous appearance, her voice carried the same warmth and genuine concern he'd come to know over the past months. Terrified, Marcus admitted with a shaky laugh. I've managed construction crews and handled difficult customers, but talking to this many people about Sarah, I'm not sure I can do it. Dolly placed a gentle hand on his arm. You know what I've learned in 50 years of performing. The audience isn't there to judge you, they're there to connect with you. Every person out there has loved someone, lost someone, or watched someone they care about struggle. Your story is their story, just with different details. Marcus nodded, trying to calm his nerves by focusing on why he was there. The Sarah Thompson Memorial Fund had grown beyond his wildest expectations. In 6 months, they'd helped 43 families navigate medical crises, preventing 17 foreclosures and keeping countless families together during their darkest hours. The fund had also established partnerships with 3 major hospitals to provide financial counseling and assistance programs for patients facing catastrophic costs. Places everyone, a stage manager called. 5 minutes to showtime. The concert had been Dolly's idea, but it had evolved into something much larger than either of them had anticipated. Nashville's music community had rallied around the cause, with Keith Urban, Maren Morris and Brad Paisley all donating performances. The evening was being filmed for television broadcast, which would expand the fund's reach nationally. Marcus had initially resisted the idea of speaking publicly, but a conversation with Dr. Patricia Williams from the East Nashville Community Clinic had changed his mind. She'd told him about a young father who'd brought his diabetic daughter in for treatment, explaining that he'd heard about the memorial fund from a friend and wondering if there might be help available. The man had cried with relief when Dr. Williams connected him with Marcus, not just because of the financial assistance, but because he'd finally found someone who understood his fear and desperation. That's why your voice matters, Dr. Williams had explained. You give hope to people who think they're facing this alone. Now, as Marcus listened to Dolly's opening song, a gentle acoustic version of Light of a Clear Blue Morning, he thought about all the people the fund had helped. The Williamson family, whose daughter Emma was now in remission and back in school. The Rodriguez family, whose father had survived a heart attack and returned to work. The Chen family, whose premature twins had spent months in the NICU but were now healthy toddlers. Each family had taught him something about resilience, about the power of community, and about how Sarah's love continued to ripple outward in ways neither of them could have imagined when she was alive. Ladies and gentlemen, Dolly's voice carried clearly through the Ryman's perfect acoustics. Tonight is about more than music. It's about the power of love to transcend death, the strength of community to lift up those in need, and the reminder that even in our darkest moments, angels walk among us. I'd like to introduce you to someone who has become one of those angels. Marcus Thompson. Marcus walked onto the stage on unsteady legs, momentarily blinded by the lights and overwhelmed by the applause. As his eyes adjusted, he could see faces in the audience, some curious, some compassionate, all attentive. He thought of Sarah watching him from wherever she was now, and his nervousness began to fade. 6 months ago, he began, his voice steady, despite his racing heart. I was living in my taxi, having lost everything I owned, trying to save my wife Sarah from cancer. I thought my story was ending, that I'd loved as deeply as I could, fought as hard as I could, and had nothing left to give to the world. The auditorium was completely quiet, 2,000 people hanging on every word. I was wrong. My story wasn't ending. It was just beginning a new chapter, and it began with an act of kindness from a stranger who saw value in me when I couldn't see it in myself. Marcus went on to tell the story of his journey, the taxi ride with Dolly, the revelation of who she was, the gift of new purpose that had transformed his life. But more importantly, he talked about Sarah, her dedication to her students, her grace during illness, her final message encouraging him to accept help. Sarah spent her career teaching children that everyone has value, everyone has potential, and everyone deserves a chance to succeed. The memorial fund in her name continues that work, but with families instead of kindergartners. We don't just provide financial assistance, we provide hope, understanding, and the knowledge that no one has to face a medical crisis alone. He shared statistics about medical bankruptcies, about families forced to choose between treatment and financial survival, about the hidden crisis affecting millions of Americans who work hard but lack adequate insurance coverage. But he also shared success stories, families who'd stayed together, treatments that had succeeded because families didn't have to delay care due to cost, children who'd grown up with both their health and their homes intact. The greatest gift Dolly gave me wasn't money or a job, Marcus concluded, his voice growing stronger with each word. It was the reminder that our stories don't end with tragedy. They transform into something larger than ourselves. Every person we help, every family we keep together, every child who gets needed medical care, that's Sarah's legacy continuing to grow. The applause was thunderous, sustained, and deeply moving. As Marcus left the stage, he felt Sarah's presence more strongly than he had since her death, not as grief or loss, but as joy, pride, and continuing love. The rest of the evening flowed like a dream. The musical performances were exceptional, but more importantly, they raised over $400,000 for the memorial fund. During intermission, Marcus met with several families who'd been helped by the fund, their gratitude overwhelming and humbling. "Mr. Thompson," said Maria Santos, whose husband had survived a construction accident thanks partly to assistance from the fund, "you saved our family. Miguel is back to work. Our kids stayed in their schools, and we kept our home. But more than that, you showed us that good people still exist in this world." After the concert, as the Ryman emptied and the stage crew broke down equipment, Dolly found Marcus sitting quietly in one of the historic venue's pews. "How do you feel?" she asked, settling beside him. "Like Sarah was here tonight," Marcus replied honestly. "Like everything we went through, all the pain and loss and struggle, led to this moment where her love could touch so many other lives." Dolly smiled. "You know, when I first met you in that taxi, I thought I was just helping one good man who'd fallen on hard times. I had no idea we were starting something this big, this important." "Neither did I," Marcus admitted. "I thought my useful life was over, that I'd given everything I had to give." "That's the funny thing about angels," Dolly mused. "They usually don't know they're angels. They just keep showing up, keep caring, keep helping, and before they know it, they've changed the world one person at a time." A year later, Marcus stood in his expanded office at Hermitage Storage Solutions, reviewing applications for the Sarah Thompson Memorial Fund. The organization had grown to serve families across Tennessee and was expanding into neighboring states. The storage facility had also grown, adding a second location and employing 12 people, including several individuals who'd been helped by the fund and wanted to give back. On his desk sat a framed photo from the Ryman concert, Dolly presenting him with a Crystal Award recognizing his service to families in medical crisis. But next to it sat something even more precious, a letter from Emma Williamson, now 8 years old and 2 years cancer-free, thanking Mr. Marcus for helping her family and including a drawing of him with angel wings. Angels, Marcus murmured to himself, remembering Dolly's words. He'd never thought of himself that way, but perhaps that was the point. Perhaps being an angel wasn't about perfection or supernatural power. Perhaps it was simply about showing up for others, about letting love guide your actions, about refusing to let suffering have the final word. His phone rang. Another family in crisis, another opportunity to help, another chance to honor Sarah's memory by ensuring that love remained stronger than loss. Sarah Thompson Memorial Fund, Marcus answered. This is Marcus. How can we help you? Outside his window, Nashville bustled with its usual energy. Dreams being chased, songs being written, lives being lived with all their complexity and beauty. And in a small office above a storage facility, Sarah's love continued its work, one family at a time, one crisis at a time, one act of kindness at a time. The taxi driver who'd once lost everything had found something even more valuable than what he'd lost. The knowledge that love never truly dies, it simply finds new ways to heal the world.